If you have not heard of anxious attachment, dismissal, if you have not heard of attachment theory, then there is definitely a rabbit hole for you to go through. And I think that it's a very fruitful rabbit hole because it does tend to give people an understanding of why things are the way they are within their relationship often. And attachment theory has been around since the 1950s, and it's one of the most science-backed ways to predict behavior. And it's really interesting because I hear a lot of levels of understanding of this in the mental health arena, where, well, one thing doesn't define me. And you're absolutely right. There can be, when we talk about conscious and subconscious, we used to think of it kind of like a giant iceberg where like 20% was above the surface and 80% was below. But the reality is it's more like 1 to 1 million with like layers and compartments. And so, yeah, there can be different parts of you that have been through different traumatic scenarios, or you've been conditioned in certain ways. There's been polarity shifts in the way that you show up in core areas, but then not in others also. And it's fascinating to me. I think it's one of the things that I really enjoy the puzzle of that, because I think everybody's a little bit different. And that's, the first part of understanding anything is diving into that and to understand your path. Like, where did you come from? So if you don't understand it, that's great. So because understanding it will give you empathy, and empathy, man, that's like, that opens you up to potential connection, and connection can lead you to integration, and integration can lead you back to wholeness, both in yourself and within your relationships. So what are we doing? Well, we're basically retraining our neural system to move out of insecure attachment and into secure attachment. And I can even, say that the cure for insecure attachment is secure attachment, because secure attachment has boundaries, and boundaries are how we love each other. And I don't know anybody I ever worked with that actually knew what healthy boundaries are. So we have to learn that. And then after we learn what a healthy boundary is, then we have to learn how to communicate that healthy boundary. And anything that's not discussed will never be addressed. And suddenly we go back to the attachment theory, and you got one part of that that's like, well, I dismiss things and I avoid and move away as a protective mechanism. Am I even looking at understanding? And it can be difficult for them. So there needs to be an empathy for that, but there's also still an accountability. And that's where the individual, the other part of the relationship, has to kind of stick to their guns and not allow themselves to be flooded, not allow themselves to, because they're not as upset about that person's behavior or lack of behavior as they are about their own ability to hold firm, healthy boundaries and communicate those. Because if they did hold those boundaries, then that person would actually be held accountable. And what does that mean? Well, you gotta be willing to give up what you have in order to get what you want. And that's really the root of what a healthy boundary actually is. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to give up on somebody or that you're going to leave them, but there are levels to that. I'm going to dismiss myself from the situation here, or I'm going to dismiss myself from the relationship while still being in the relationship, or I'm going to actually leave the relationship. Those are three very, very different levels, right? And there is room for rupture repair, and reconnection. There's a lot of room that's in there, especially if you notice that someone's core wound has a lot to do with shame, because shame can fuel hiding as one of its biggest coping mechanisms. But a person that experienced shame is not a dishonorable person. Otherwise, they wouldn't experience shame. I don't know if that clicks for you. So, and it's important for us to understand and then have empathy and all of that. But one thing I want to top all that off is this is still a system of symptoms. And at the end of the day, the system of symptoms is protecting the wound, the cause. So we can try to treat the symptom, or we can also understand the symptom in such a way that we unmask what the actual wound is. And then we ask bigger questions like, how do I heal this wound, instead of all the energy I'm putting into understanding the symptom? It's helpful. It is to understand the symptoms, but it's more helpful to not just understand the wound, but learn how to be with the wound in such a way so that it heals.